Today, I'm going to tell you two stories. The first story is about this woman in China who goes on a hike into this beautiful forest, and it quickly spirals into a complete nightmare. And the second story is about this small village in Taiwan where this very strange event happens. And it spooks the villagers so badly that the Taiwanese government actually investigated. And what they discovered defies any logical explanation. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, on the like button's birthday, offer to bring the cake. But when you sing them happy birthday, make sure you replace the candles with TNT. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. Early on the morning of February 16th, 2020, a 39-year-old woman named Faye stepped out of a convenience store in a small village in China. She was wearing a bright red distinctive coat, and in her hands were a whole bunch of snacks that she had just purchased. So Faye had lived in this village her whole life. She was a very simple person, and she had a really specific daily schedule that she basically always adhered to. And it was, she would get up early, she would throw on her jacket, and she would head out to this convenience store, get some snacks, and then she would either go back home where she lived with her husband, or she would go to her parents' house or her sister's house to pay them a visit. And that was basically what she did every single day. And so this day had started exactly the same as every other day. And after she left the store and she began eating some snacks and, thinking about where she was gonna go next, whether it was her house or a relative's house, she's walking down this road when suddenly she hears people calling out to her. And so she stops and she turns, and there are these 5 people that are clustered together standing at the top of this trailhead. So Faye's village was home to this beautiful hiking trail that started right where these people were standing. The trail went up this mountainside and up into this huge forest where there were all these ponds and waterfalls. I mean, it was strikingly beautiful. And that area, the forest with all the ponds, was called the 18 Ponds of the Dragon King. It was called that because there were literally 18 ponds sort of scattered throughout this forest. And then also the village where Faye lived that was right up against it, well, it meant Dragon King in Chinese. But even though Faye had grown up here, she had never once gone on that hiking trail. She had heard about it, and loads of her friends and family had all been up there and talked about its striking beauty. But Faye, she had always stayed away. But there was actually a pretty good reason for that. So Faye, when she was younger, she had this tumor. And in order to get rid of it, she had to take all this medication that was pretty physically harmful and left her with some pretty serious long-term effects. And even though the tumor, did go away and she recovered, that process of recovering and taking all those medications and going to the doctor, it sort of instilled in her this mentality that she was frail and delicate and that she shouldn't take any chances and risk getting hurt. And so she really never did anything that was even remotely risky or even perceived to be risky. Like, for example, hiking up into the mountains. Too risky for her, and so she avoided it. And instead, she kind of developed this really simple, safe daily routine of getting snacks and visiting family, and that's all she ever did. And while in some ways this did, keep Faye safe, it also made her very isolated and lonely. She didn't really have any friends or do anything. She was just kind of stuck in her ways. And so Faye is on this road, and these villagers, these 5 villagers over at the trailhead, have just deliberately called to her by name. They're saying, "Hey, Faye, over here." And Faye's turned and she's looking at them, and they're clearly getting ready to go hike up into the 18 Ponds of the Dragon King. And they tell her, "Hey, come with us, come hiking with us, come check it out." And for Faye, this was so unusual. This was not even remotely how her life went, that there was something in her that for a second just felt really excited. I mean, she did sort of rely on her schedule and her discipline of doing the same thing every day. It kept her safe. But this sudden invitation from these people, these villagers, it just felt like, why not? Why not do something different for once? And she's also thinking, how dangerous can it be? I'm with other people. They seem really competent. Maybe this is a good idea. Maybe I'll just go with them. What the heck? See what happens. And so Faye found herself just sort of drifting over to these very friendly 5 people and saying, "You know what? What the heck? Yeah, I'll come with you. I've never been up there. I'm sure it's great. Let's go." And so sure enough, Faye and her newfound 5 friends from the village, they begin hiking up this trail. And over the next couple of hours, Faye is seeing a beautiful landscape that she was so close to her whole life that now she's seeing for the first time. And it's like revelatory. She can't believe that she's lived this close to this majesty for so long and she's never seen it. Like this was a life-changing experience for her. And so her mood is just so good. And these 5 people are so wonderful and they're all chattering and talking about their lives. And, Faye's opening up about hers and her health scares and all these different things. And eventually, they make their way into this forest, which is really dense, but they eventually reach one of these ponds, one of the 18 ponds, and it's got this huge clearing, and all the sunlight's pouring in, and there's a waterfall leading into the pond. It's truly stunningly beautiful, and Faye's friends, they all take a seat right on the shore of the pond, and they break out some snacks, and Faye, she sits down, she's got those snacks she bought from the convenience store, and they basically have a picnic right on the shore. And for Faye, it was like this was the most amazing day, potentially, of her whole life. She had broken out of her comfort zone, she had met these wonderful people who were so inclusive, and here she is experiencing this unbelievable natural beauty, like the day couldn't get any better. But as she was sitting there on the side of the pond, enjoying this beautiful scene, she started to feel really intensely fatigued. And at first she's thinking, oh, of course, I don't really get out much and exercise much, and I just hiked up this mountain into this forest. Of course I'm tired. But she felt herself kind of slumping back on the rock she was on and almost like positioning herself like she might lay down and sleep. And then before long, it was like the world around her began getting hazy and, she could see her friends still talking and they weren't really looking at her. They're just kind of enjoying their food. And then it was like Faye just could not keep her eyes open and she put her head down, closed her eyes, and she fell asleep. When Faye woke up again, she was still laying in that same spot, but now it was dark. And also, her 5 friends were gone. She was all alone next to this pond in the middle of this forest. And for Faye, it was like immediately this jolt of panic rocketed through her. She starts looking around for these, friends of hers. They've got to be here somewhere. They wouldn't just abandon her. They were so nice. How could this possibly be? But she's looking around and all she can see is just darkness. There's some moonlight coming through the clearing over the pond, but when she looked into the tree line, it was just all dark and there's no one. All she can hear is birds and insects, night sounds. And remember, Faye is not somebody who would ever find herself in this position. This is so far out of her comfort zone. Alone at night in this forest, in this austere environment, suddenly it felt very austere. And she's terrified. And at the same time, her mind starts telling her, oh my gosh, this whole thing was a trap. Those 5 people weren't my friends. They brought me up here. They tricked me. They drugged me, or maybe they've left and they're gonna come back and hurt me. And so she's thinking like, oh, I'm in danger. I have to get out of here. And she turns and she looks at the trail that brought them up here. And all she sees is just this dark tree line. And there's this cut path through the trees that's basically pitch black. And she's thinking, I have to walk through that alone in the middle of the night. She didn't have a light or anything that would help guide her way out of here. But as she's sitting there panicking, she's thinking, I have to go right now, like it's life or death. And so she stands up and immediately she feels really weak on her feet. Like she's super fatigued still, but it's like adrenaline is coursing through her body. She's got to get out of here. And she starts stumbling her way into the tree line where it's super dark and she's trying to stay on this trail, but she keeps deviating because it's so dark and she's bumping into trees and she keeps hearing noises all around her that she's convinced are these 5 people coming back to hurt her or animals or she doesn't know what. She is in full panic mode here, but just for hours or what felt like hours, she just stumbled through these trails, getting completely disoriented. And finally she comes to the stream and she just stops. And she's sitting there and she realizes, the sun is starting to come up. So she kneels down and she scoops some water into her mouth. And right as the sun comes up across the mountainside, there's enough light that miraculously she realizes she can actually see a path down the side of the mountain that she believes will bring her back to her village. Like she's gonna get out of here unscathed, presumably. And so she kind of catches her breath. She gets another sip from the stream. And then with the help of the sunlight, she navigated her way to this trail that she could see, and down the mountain she went. And as she was going down this mountain, she looked down towards her village, and she saw clearly there was a big group of people, presumably villagers, out looking for her, that were right down on the trail, sort of like the beginning of the trail. And Faye, she's waving and calling out to them, and a few of the people in the crowd, they're looking up at her, and maybe from the distance, they couldn't really tell who she was or what she was doing, but there was some level of recognition, but she couldn't really tell what the reaction of the crowd was, but she had gotten their attention, and Faye's so excited, and down the hill she goes. Suddenly, she feels totally rejuvenated because she's gonna be okay, and she gets closer to this big crowd of people, and she sees now it's friends, it's family, it's definitely her people. But the looks on their faces are not the looks that Faye is expecting. I mean, she did understand that, clearly I've been out here at least for several hours. They must have organized the search party. They've been worried about me, but here I am. Like, they gotta be relieved now, right? Like, they found me. But no, the looks on all these people's faces were of shock, were of horror, not really sure what to make of Faye coming down the mountainside toward them. And then, when Faye got close enough to the group that she could actually make out individual faces, Faye saw her sister in the crowd. And she waved to her sister and said, "Hey, I'm okay, it's okay, everything's fine, like, come on, everything's fine." And Faye's sister kind of broke ranks very hesitantly, and then she finally jogs up to Faye and the two embrace, and it's this really emotional moment. And Faye's sister says to Faye, "Where have you been?" And Faye kind of steps back from her and says, "Well, yesterday or a few hours ago, I don't know, I kind of lost track of time, but I think it was yesterday. I saw these 5 people and, we kind of made our way into the mountains. I don't know, I shouldn't have done it, but I fell asleep and, here I am. I'm so sorry if I scared you, but I'm okay." But Faye's sister, it's like she was hearing what Faye was saying, but couldn't process it. And eventually her sister kind of stepped back and looked at Faye and just said, "That can't be true. You've been gone for 17 days. Faye didn't really have time to appreciate what she had just been told, nor did the group really have time to appreciate that Faye apparently has shown back up again. Because pretty much immediately, Faye was rushed to the hospital where doctors discovered she had lost 60 pounds. She was horribly malnourished and dehydrated. I mean, they didn't understand how she was still alive. And while Faye is being treated, she began to hear what had happened over the past 17 days she had been gone. They had security footage that showed when Faye went into the woods because she had on that bright red distinctive coat. They caught her walking into the forest. There she goes. So they knew she was up in the 7.5-mile stretch, which is this, 18 Ponds of the Dragon King. It's a distinctive 7.5-mile plot. They knew she had to be up there. And also because this was around the time of COVID, there were really strict checkpoints of all the other villages in the area. So anybody going in and out of these villages, they'd be documented. And they knew Faye had not gone into any of the surrounding villages. So she had to be in the 18 Ponds of the Dragon King, that 7.5-mile stretch. But despite launching a huge search party into that 7.5-mile stretch to go look for her, and also firing off fireworks left and right to try to get her attention, not only did nobody find any trace of Faye, but Faye would also say, "I never heard fireworks, I never heard or saw any searchers." From her perspective, it literally felt like she had just fallen asleep for a few hours and woken up, and here she was, not 17 days. But eventually, Faye would actually go into detail about the specifics of what she remembered about this ordeal. Namely, she would talk about those 5 people, her new friends, who sort of encouraged her to go up into the 18 Ponds of the Dragon King. And she remembered their names, what they looked like, she remembered discussions she had with them, and she painted them as wonderful people, but it's like she just woke up and they were gone. And so she thought, maybe they had tricked her and, maybe they drugged her and that's why she can't remember this stuff, or she didn't know what, but she couldn't reconcile the fact that they seemed like such nice people, but must have had something to do with what's happened here. But after Faye said that, her family, they kind of looked at each other like, "Faye, those can't be the 5 people you were with." And Faye's like, "Why?" And they're like, "'Cause the 5 people you named and described, they've been dead for a long time." Now, Faye was incredulous, but when they reviewed the security footage that showed Faye clearly in her bright red distinctive coat walking up the trail into the 18 Ponds, there was nobody else with her. those 5 people, they're not on camera. So the 18 Ponds of the Dragon King is not just a beautiful hiking destination. It's also believed to be haunted. Locals claim that when they look up at the mountainside that the trail passes through and then up to that forest as well, they can sometimes see these eerie blue lights moving around in the trees that nobody can explain. There's a story that, people that have died, their spirits sort of haunt this area looking for living people to switch places with. In fact, when Faye began coming down the mountainside and she looked and saw that huge crowd of people that she believed was basically, her search party out to look for her, well, in reality, that wasn't the case. One of the locals had looked up and seen what he thought was another one of those lights, not a blue light, but a red light. It was Faye's red jacket. He had seen this red thing bouncing around off in the distance, and he thought it was, one of these strange lights, a ghost, let's say. And so he had told people in the village, and everybody was really excited, and they ran out to go see what it was, and it sort of was a ghost. It was Faye, who'd been gone for 17 days coming down the mountain, and nobody could believe it. They were so shocked. And so to this day, nobody knows what actually happened to Faye. All we know is we have her on camera disappearing into this trail, into this forest in the mountainside, and then turning back up 17 days later. Keep in mind, before this, the longest anybody had survived out there after getting lost was 12 days, and it was this young man who was really fit who barely survived. Faye was in horrible shape, and she was out there for 17 days, but somehow she showed up alive. Faye still lives in the village today, and her story, at least from her perspective, has never changed. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video and for allowing me to talk about therapy and how it helped get me to where I am today. When I got out of the military in 2017, that was arguably one of the hardest times in my entire life. Even though I was surrounded by friends and family and everybody wanted me to be successful as a civilian, I just wasn't able to kind of reacclimate back into the civilian world. It was like my mindset was still trapped in the military and I just couldn't make the jump. And so as a result, I kind of bottled up my emotions and sort of got easily frustrated with everybody around me. I was mad all the time. But I was kind of blind to it. I actually thought I was just fine. It was not until my friends and family intervened and told me, you really need to get some serious help here. You're kind of falling apart. You need some help. And I took their advice and I did go see a therapist. And honestly, that changed my life. In early 2018, when I actually saw a therapist, the thing that really did make the change in me was the therapist was able to kind of give me perspective on my life and kind of show me really kind of where I stand and what was going for me and what I needed to work on. And it really helped guide me towards making better decisions. And today, I still rely on therapy because, I'm in this world of content creation where there's so much pressure on you to, keep your views up and look the part and be happy and successful and all these different things. But I'm a human. I have a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that I need to work out as well. And luckily, my therapist kind of keeps me grounded and keeps giving me the perspective that I need to keep me grounded. And so if you're struggling right now, either because you are, or because maybe your circle of friends and family have kind of clued you in that maybe you could use some help, consider giving therapy a try. And a great starting point for therapy is BetterHelp. If this sounds helpful, you can go to betterhelp.com/MrBallen to get 10% off your first month of therapy. One morning in the spring of 1959, a middle-aged civil engineer named Wu Chiu biked through his rural town in Taiwan. He was on his way home from work, and normally he sort of enjoyed this bike ride home. He would take his time and look at the beautiful temple and all the marketplaces. But today, he was not looking at the scenery. He was in a huge rush because he had gotten word that his wife had become horribly sick. And so Wu is pedaling as fast as he possibly can, trying to get home to his wife to help her and take care of her. But as he got to his neighborhood, he started to realize that he was really gassed. Literally pedaling to his house was just unbelievably exhausting. Now, he was sort of sprinting, but at the same time, Wu was a pretty athletic guy. And so this type of a ride was something that he should have been able to handle. But it just sort of seemed like there was a weight attached to him, like he was pulling an extra 100 pounds or something. But regardless, Wu pushed through the pain, knowing he had to get to his wife at all costs, and he turned the corner onto his street, and as he was making his final approach to his house, he saw one of his neighbors. And even though Wu was completely in a rush, he was also very polite. And so even though he's like, sweating and hustling, he still took the time to turn and wave to his neighbor. And his neighbor, who clearly looked at Wu, made eye contact with him, saw it was Wu. Instead of waving back, they kind of scowled at Wu, like they were disgusted by him. They didn't wave back and they turned and just went the other way. And Wu's like, what was that about? What did I do? But again, Wu has to get home. So he sort of wrote that off and he's like, okay, keep on pedaling. He gets even closer to his house. And then it just so happens another neighbor comes outside. And again, Wu's politeness comes through and he's like sweating profusely. He's like, hey, how are you? And this neighbor as well looks at Wu with this look of total disdain on their face. Like there's something wrong with Wu. And Wu's like, what did I do? What's going on here? And so that neighbor does not wave back. They go back inside their house. But again, Wu really can't focus on this weirdness with his neighbors. He needs to get home to his wife. And so again, with his heavy legs, he finally gets to his house, parks his bike, and runs inside to see his wife. Wu would find his wife in their bedroom, in bed, and she was looking very pale and sick. Her name was Lin Wang Yao. She was 37 years old, and generally speaking, she was a pretty frail person who was sort of prone to minor illnesses all the time. And so, Wu was sort of accustomed to her not doing so well. But as soon as he saw his wife, he could tell that whatever was going on with her was serious. This was not one of her typical bouts of, minor illnesses. Something was wrong here. And so Wu immediately began to tend to his wife. He made her some soup and some tea, but, Lin barely could sip either of them. And Lin also, she had this fever that just kept getting worse and worse. And, Wu was hoping she would break the fever at some point. But, all night as Wu was up tending to her, her fever just kept getting worse. And so Wu, he really didn't know what to do. And this is 1959. They're in a rural village in Taiwan. And so it was difficult to get to a hospital. And so Wu really wanted to find a way to treat his wife at home. And he was just praying that, over the next 24 hours or so, she would show signs of getting better. But over the next couple of days, Lin did not get better. Her fever never broke. She basically stopped eating and drinking. And it was like she was drifting in and out of consciousness. And then finally, after 3 days of this, Wu knew, if I don't get my wife to a hospital, no matter how hard it is to do that, she might not make it. The primary hurdle for Wu to get Lin to the hospital was actually just transportation. He didn't have a car, but he did know that one of his neighbors on his street had a donkey cart. And so he could maybe load his wife into that and they could get her to the hospital in the cart. And so Wu, he went outside and he found the neighbor who happened to be outside, actually with their donkey cart, and he flagged them down and he asked them if they'd be willing to transport Lin to the hospital in their cart. But just like a few days earlier, when Wu had been biking on his street and his neighbors had been totally weird to him and sort of looked at him with these obvious looks of disgust, this neighbor, who knew Wu really well, looked at Wu and basically gave him one of those looks, like, you gross person, and he turned around like he wasn't even gonna talk to Wu. But then Wu, in desperation, just says, look, my wife, she's dying. She needs to get to the hospital. Please do it for her. And at that, this neighbor, clearly despite their misgivings, sort of turns back around and says, fine, we can use the cart and get her to the hospital. And so Wu and this neighbor, they go into Wu's house, they scoop up Lin, they put her on the cart, and it takes several hours, but they do eventually get her to the hospital. And by the time they're there, Lin is basically unconscious. They rush her inside, and the doctors and nurses, they try to do everything they can to stabilize Lin. But as soon as she was admitted, it was like her condition only got worse and worse. And that night, she slipped into a coma, and then she died. Wu was devastated. He and the neighbor took Lin's body, put it back on the donkey cart, and brought it back to their town. And then Wu began setting up for a funeral service. So in Taiwan, it's customary during funerals to have the body of the loved one be brought into the house where it stays for 7 days before they're cremated. And so Wu, after getting Lin's body back home, he put her into a coffin, set her up in the living room, and then over the next several days, Wu was at home next to his dead wife as friends and family, and even the neighbors who, clearly had some issue with Wu, they all came in to pay their respects. And while this was happening, Wu, who was already devastated at the loss of his wife, as he would listen to people come in and pray over the body and sort of talk to the body as if she was still alive and talk about how wonderful she was, it really hit Wu hard because it was like he was suddenly realizing how different his life was going to be without his wife. Lin was a very simple woman. She was illiterate, she really didn't travel, and she was very introverted and quiet, but she was a wonderful wife. She took care of Wu. She cared about him deeply. She was a wonderful cook. And just generally, she made people around her feel safe. life and happy. And so, Wu, it's like he just found himself over and over having these fits of just crying. Like he can't believe that Lin is now gone. But on the third day after Lin had passed away, so now we're about halfway through this funeral service, which takes about a week, Wu was in his living room dealing with this overwhelming sadness about losing his wife, and there's this procession of people coming in and out of the house. And as Wu was sitting there, there was sort of a cadence and a rhythm to how the days were going. But at some point, it was like everybody in the room just suddenly went completely silent, and then people began to gasp. And Wu, he was sort of head down dealing with his sadness, and he sort of noticed the change in the room, and he heard people gasping, and he looked up and he noticed a few of the mourners. They weren't just gasping, they were open-mouthed and horrified, and they were looking at the casket. And so Wu went from the mourners and he looks over at the casket, and there in this open casket is Lin, except now she's sitting upright, looking around the room, clearly alive. Now, at first, Wu's reaction was, oh my goodness, my wife must have just slipped into a really deep coma, so deep that the doctors could not distinguish it from death. And so this is a mistake. Like she was never dead. She's just, waking up from her coma. But at the same time, as Wu's having this immediate reaction to seeing his wife sitting up in her coffin, he's thinking, but over these 3 days that I've not left her side, I've been with her body the whole time. She's not moved, she's not made a sound, she's certainly not had anything to eat or drink. Like this just doesn't seem possible. And so Wu and the other mourners, after the shock of seeing this sort of wore off, everybody kind of jumped into action and they rushed over to the casket and they very gently lifted Lin out of the casket and they carried her over to her bed and they laid her down, and Lin immediately kind of gestured for water. She was too weak to speak. She had lost a bunch of weight, but she's gesturing for water. And so they give her some water and she sips the water, and everyone's looking at Wu like, we have to get her to the hospital. Like, what else can we possibly do? But Wu, he's looking at his wife and she's so frail. She really seems like now she is on the precipice of dying here. And he's thinking, she can't survive another donkey cart ride to the hospital. And so we have to keep her here and hope that she, recovers enough that maybe in a day or two we could bring her to the hospital, but certainly not now. And so over the next couple of hours, Wu, along with some friends and family, just stayed by Lin's bedside, constantly checking on her, making sure she really was alive. And, she was, albeit, very subdued, but she continued to drink water and had a little food. And amazingly, over the span of only a few hours, Lin went from basically literally being dead to actually seeming to get a whole lot better. In fact, to the point where, Lin was actually sitting up in bed and, stretching and moving around as if she was completely fine. In fact, in Wu's opinion, it almost seemed like within a few hours, she was actually physically almost better off than she was normally when she was alive. Like it was a miracle how quickly she was recovering. And so by that night, when Lin really did seem like she was effectively back to her normal self, the mourners all left and said, okay, well, I guess Lin's okay. And they left, and then it was just Wu and Lin. And Wu had no idea how to handle any of this. He was just so grateful that his wife was alive, even though, again, none of this made any sense. Like, this is so shocking. But he's just grateful that she's alive. The next day, when they woke up, Lin was so much better that she was out of bed, walking around the house, really excited to face the day. And Wu's like, dude, you were dead yesterday. Like, what's going on here? But Lin said to him, hey, I want to go out on a walk. You want to go on a walk with me, go to the temple? And Wu, he's looking at Lin, still like unable to comprehend what's happened here. But he's thinking, she does seem like she's in great health right now. And if she wants to go for a walk, great, I'll go with her. And so the two of them went outside and they began to walk. And as they're walking, Wu, he's a pretty athletic guy, remember? He found himself barely able to keep pace with Lin, who was like speed walking towards the temple. And on top of that, as they're walking and Wu's like, gassed as he's trying to keep up with his wife, periodically neighbors would, wave to Lin and Wu, and for just a brief second they would chat. And as Wu listened to Lin speak, he began to notice something really strange. That Lin, maybe he didn't notice it before, but he was definitely noticing it when she was speaking to other people. She just sounded different, like her accent was different. It did not sound like his wife. And the weirdness around Lin's miraculous recovery only got more weird over time. Before Lin died and came back to life, she had been illiterate. But now, she was not only able to read, but she could also read and speak fluent Mandarin. a language she didn't know before she died. Also, Lynn used to be a really skilled cook who loved cooking meat dishes in particular. But now that Lynn has recovered, she no longer wanted to eat meat. She said she was a vegetarian and basically stopped cooking. Also, Lynn began speaking with real authority about the professions of accounting and bookkeeping. And then also she advised her husband to quit his job as an engineer and open up a building materials shop in town because there was a real need for it and he'd make real money that way. And believe it or not, like Wu, he doesn't understand what's going on with his wife, but she really seemed like a force to be reckoned with now. And however she had gained all this extra knowledge, it really seemed like she was sharp these days. And so he was like, all right. And he quits his job as an engineer, opens up this building materials shop, and really quickly, he and his wife began making real money, more money than they had ever made before. And while all this was happening, Wu and Lin became the biggest curiosity in town. I mean, the story of how Lin had miraculously come back to life with all these bizarre personality changes, not only was that spreading all around town, but it eventually spread all across the country. It was like everybody was talking about Lin. In fact, this story spread so far that it eventually reached the Taiwanese government. And when they heard about it, they were so intrigued, they decided they would investigate. And so on March 17th, 1962, the Taiwanese government sent for Lin. And Lin was very happy to go. She was ready to tell her story and answer any questions they had. This was all just kind of exciting, the idea that the government wanted to know how she had made this unbelievable recovery. And so the government, they scoop her up and they bring her to this army hospital and they tell her she's gonna be meeting with the chief physician there. And so the chief physician, he's inside of the room, he's waiting for Lin. He's never met her before. He's only been told roughly what the story is. There's this woman who's acting really funny after coming back from the dead, and okay, fine, I'm gonna talk to her and see what's going on. And so Lin, she walks in the room and the chief physician, he looks at her, she's an ordinary looking woman, and she walks over to him, and before he can even begin a line of questioning, Lin looks at him like with a double take, like there's a moment of recognition, and she says to the chief physician, "Uncle?" And the chief physician is like, "Why are you calling me uncle?" And then Lin would go on to explain why she had just called him uncle, and the chief physician was so shocked by her story that he left the room and he called for his wife. And then when his wife came to the hospital, he didn't tell her what was going on. He just said, "Come with me." She walks into the room with the chief physician, he and his wife, and Lin, who's never met this woman, and the woman has never met Lin, they see each other for the first time, and Lin looks at her and just goes, "Auntie." And it was at this point that Lin revealed to the chief physician and his wife that Lin really was not her name. That's what people called her, but that wasn't who she was. Her real name was Zhu Shuhua, and the chief physician and his wife literally couldn't believe it because they had not given any information about their personal lives to Lin. They've only listened to her story, and she's just offered up what she claims her name is. She's called them uncle and auntie, and wouldn't you know it, the chief physician and his wife, they did have a niece whose name was Zhu Shuhua, and a year earlier, she, their niece, had gone missing. She'd gone missing during the Chinese Civil War, and she had been presumed dead, but nobody had ever found her body. According to Lin, Zhu did die during that war. She was robbed and murdered by a group of fishermen. And then after she was killed, her spirit was sort of stuck in this purgatory for some time. But then, a year after Zhu's death, when Lin died, Lin said that Zhu's spirit entered Lin's body, and thus, she came back to life, Zhu did, but in a different body. And so Lin basically was telling the chief physician and his wife that she was Zhu. She had been reincarnated in Lin's body. And as crazy as this story sounded, the chief physician and his wife couldn't help but notice that as Lin was speaking, her accent was exactly like Zhu's. In fact, just generally speaking, Lin was acting exactly like their niece. She really did seem like the reincarnated version of Zhu. And then when they dug deeper and spoke more to Lin and also her husband Wu, the physician and his wife learned that, Lin, when she woke up and was reincarnated, suddenly she was a vegetarian, just like Zhu. Suddenly, Lin was interested in accounting and bookkeeping. Well, that was something that Zhu was interested in. And also, the biggest one was that Lin had been illiterate, but then she wakes up and suddenly she reads and speaks Mandarin fluently, the language that Zhu read and spoke. And so the chief physician, he couldn't help but start to believe that maybe Lin was telling the truth here. Maybe this really was his niece's reincarnated spirit. And so, as sort of strange as it was, he told the Taiwanese government that, you know what, there's something weird happening here, and, I can't help but believe that maybe there's some truth to this story. But if we really want to pressure test it, Lynn claims that she knows who killed my niece. Like, she knows who killed her, because now she's Zhu. She said it was this particular group of fishermen. And actually, Lynn had given the names of these fishermen that apparently robbed and killed Zhu. And so the chief physician told the government, why don't we investigate my niece's disappearance as a murder and go talk to those fishermen and see if that holds up. And so that's what the government did. They tracked these fishermen down, but unfortunately, only one of them was still alive. But they interviewed this guy, and Lynn would actually say that particular fisherman, he was not one of the aggressors. He was actually the only fisherman in the group who tried to save Zhu, even though obviously she did get killed, but that fisherman had tried to stop what was happening to her. And when the government talked to him, he would say that, yes, unfortunately, she was killed, and I did try to stop it, but I just couldn't. Keep in mind, this fisherman had not been given any information. This is entirely like a brand new investigation. He has no idea what they know. But he basically exactly mirrored what Lynn said happened. And so based on this, they actually closed Zhu Xua's case. It was labeled a disappearance. They changed it to a murder, and they labeled her killers as the fishermen who were deceased at the time. But they were labeled as her killers, and they closed the case based entirely on, a reincarnated spirit's testimony. And there's one more thing. Back in the beginning of the story, when Wu is hustling home, biking as fast as he can to get to his sick wife, and he has those weird encounters with his neighbors, well, it would turn out when those neighbors were interviewed, they would say that the reason they gave those looks to Wu, those looks of disgust and disdain, is because, one, they knew Wu was married to Lin, and they were also aware that she was sick in bed. But here comes Wu pedaling up the road, and he's got this woman sitting on the back of his bike that is clearly not his wife. And so everyone's reaction to that is, Wu is having an affair on his poor wife who's sick in bed. What a horrible person. Now, Wu swore there was no woman on his bike, but he would recall that the bike did feel really heavy, like he was pulling extra weight at the end there. Later, Lin would say that actually Zhu's spirit had come down and hopped on the back of Wu's bike, and it was her basically riding along, hitching a ride up to their house. She was the woman that the neighbors were seeing. But Wu, he was so focused on getting home, even though he felt that heavy weight, he never turned around, and so he didn't see her. And then once Lin passed away, Zhu's spirit, who was now at the home, sort of waiting for this to happen, she switched places with her. For the rest of her life, Lin would live as Zhu, and she would become a community and spiritual leader. And she would pass away in 2018 at the age of 97, and at her funeral, there would be banners hung that actually said both names, Lin and Zhu. And so if reincarnation is real, this story might just be one of the most credible cases ever recorded. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. All right, until next time, see ya. Normally, if you're trying to solve a mystery, if you can gather more information and gather more evidence, it will make it easier for you to solve that mystery. But in today's story, that's not the case. You have a whole family that suddenly goes missing under very suspicious circumstances, and 10 years later, we still have no clue what happened to them, despite a plethora of information and evidence gathered, including a very famous videotape that shows them walking in a trance-like state right before they go missing. But before we get into that family story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please replace the like button's shampoo with Nair hair remover, and also subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of those weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In 2009, the Jameson family, which was Bobby, who was 44, Sherilyn, who was 40, and their daughter Madison, who was 6 years old, were living in Eufaula, Oklahoma on lakefront property. While they seemed to be living a simple and happy life, behind the scenes, their life was in turmoil. Bobby suffered from bad chronic back pain that he had as a result of a car accident that he was in 2003. Sherilyn was bipolar. She was medicated for it, but she didn't always take her meds, causing her to lash out at her family members, and it caused bouts of severe depression. Bobby and Sherilyn also believed that their house was haunted by 3 or 4 spirits who lived on their roof. Bobby was so convinced of this that he went to his pastor and asked where he could buy special bullets that he could shoot at these spirits. So for all of these reasons, the Jameson family was actually looking to leave their property in Eufaula and move somewhere else and hopefully start all over again, fresh, with a new shot at happiness. After the Jamesons would vanish, their family and friends would say, "We had no idea any of this was happening. We had no idea they were even considering a move." Now, this move they were considering was not a typical move. They were not looking to move into another house. They were looking to move onto a piece of property where they could place their storage container and live in the storage container until at some point they were going to build a house on a mountain and then move into the house. And they had actually already found a plot of land about 30 miles away from where they were currently living in a town called Red Oak. Now, the storage container itself that they planned on living in was actually sitting on their property in Eufaula, and it drew a lot of attention from the neighbors because Sherilyn would graffiti on it, "The neighbors have poisoned our cats. Witches don't like it when you kill their cats," because it turns out Sherilyn believed that she was a witch. So unsurprisingly, the neighbors avoided the Jameson family at all cost. Several weeks before the Jameson family went missing, they actually brought in a male boarder, so a guy that was going to live with them and help with manual labor in exchange for room and board. The boarder was a white supremacist that immediately took exception to Sherilyn, who was part Native American. And so anytime Bobby was out of the house, the white supremacist boarder would get into a fight with Sherilyn. And one day it came to a head and Sherilyn drew a gun on the boarder and said to leave the property or she was going to shoot him. The boarder refused to leave, and so Sherilyn began firing shots into the ground at his feet until he left. Now, once the Jameson family disappeared, this white supremacist boarder became one of the primary suspects. But when the FBI found him, he had a rock-solid alibi and was quickly crossed off the list of potential suspects. On October 8th, 2009, Bobby, Sherilyn, their daughter Madison, and their dog Maisie load up the truck and they start driving towards Red Oak. They were apparently going to go scout out this piece of property that they wanted to purchase to live on with the storage container. Now, according to family and friends, it was not uncommon for the Jamesons to vanish for several days at a time without telling anybody where they went. And it would turn out that they would go into the woods for these retreats where they would get away from technology in the city. When they were gone for a few days and no one had heard from them, no one thought twice about it. On top of this, Bobby and Sherilyn had informed Madison's school that they'd be pulling her out of class because they were going to be moving. So when Madison didn't show up for school, the school did not raise any alarms because they assumed she'd been pulled out of school. On October 16th, 2009, 8 days after the Jamesons had left their house to go scout out this property in Red Oak, a couple of hunters in the Panola Mountains, which is near Red Oak, found the Jamesons' truck parked on the side of the road. Now, these hunters are in the middle of nowhere, which means the truck is in the middle of nowhere. And so as they're walking over to it, they're expecting to see the owner of the truck. But as they get over to the truck, there is no owner anywhere. They called out a couple times to see if they could get this person's attention or whoever it was that owned it, and no one came over to them. They look in the truck and they see there is this very sick-looking dog sitting on the back seat. It would turn out it was the Jamesons' dog. It was Maisie. Now, the windows were up and the truck was locked, so the hunters called the police. Police show up, they break a window, and they get Maisie out of the truck. They give her food and water, and she would end up making a full recovery. They look in the vehicle and all of the Jamesons' personal effects are in there. Their phones, their wallets, their jackets, their clothes. Underneath the front seat was $32,000 of cash in a bank bag. Also, they found this weird letter written by Sherilyn to Bobby that was this 11-page hate letter that basically accused Bobby of being a hermit, which seems like a strange thing to ramble for 11 pages about, but either way. The police did an initial search of the area looking for the Jameson family, but they couldn't find them. And so the running theory was they must have pulled over and walked into the woods for some reason, got turned around, and they're just lost, and we need to go find them. The police were able to use the cell phones that had been left inside of the vehicle and were able to use their GPS locations and track where the phones had been before coming to rest inside of this vehicle. And they saw that the cell phones had actually gone up the trail a little ways. They had been up towards the top of the mountain for about 15 minutes before coming back down and then wound up in the truck where they were when they were found. So the police walk up the hill to where the GPS said they had been, and they find all these footprints that look to be Madison's because there's a child's footprint as well as probably Bobby's and Sherilyn's. But they're nowhere to be found, and there's no clue of where they went after being up there. When they started scanning through each of the cell phones to see if there was any information about where they might have gone, they found on Bobby's phone a picture of Madison that was taken up at that little location that the GPS took them. The picture of Madison has been hotly contested on the internet for a long time now. It's hard to tell in the image if Madison is happy or sad. It's also unclear based on her body language if her parents are taking the photo or if this was kind of staged by someone else. So between the GPS showing that they had been at the top of this mountain at one point, plus the picture of Madison confirming she had at least been up there, the police started this massive search with that section on the mountain where they had been standing as kind of the center point. And they searched all around the Panola Mountains. But after an extensive search of this new area, they didn't find anything. No new leads had come in, so ultimately the search was called off. 4 years later, in November of 2013, some hikers were in the Panola Mountains, about 5 kilometers, maybe a little bit less, from where the Jameson truck was found, and they come across skeletal remains of 3 individuals. It looked like 2 adults and a child. They were laying face down side by side, and it was clear that they were not complete skeletons, but there was enough there to know for sure that these are people. As soon as the police were called, everybody assumed this has to be the Jameson family. It would actually take almost a year before they were able to confirm that yes, those bones are in fact the Jameson family. While the Oklahoma medical examiner was not able to determine a cause of death because the remains were just partial, they didn't have enough to work with, they did see that there was a big hole in the back of Bobby's skull and there was other holes in some of the other bones that many people assumed were from bullets, but it was never determined if that actually was what it was from. As soon as it came out that it was the Jameson family's remains, the first prominent theory was that this had to have been a murder-suicide, where Sherilyn, who was mad at Bobby, she wrote that hate-filled 11-page letter that was found in the car. You know, she's unstable from not taking her medication to combat her bipolar disorder. She seems like the person that would take her family out and then turn on herself. But all of her family said she would never harm her daughter. I mean, maybe she would have harmed Bobby, but she never would have harmed her daughter. Also, why would you have brought your dog along and left your dog in the car and $32,000 of cash in the car? So that doesn't fit that scenario at all. The next theory was, well, maybe they just pulled over, walked into the woods for some reason, and then got lost and died of exposure. And that's still definitely a possible theory, except at the time they went missing, the temperatures were very mild. They were not dropping below freezing at night. It didn't rain very much, so it was kind of perfect conditions to be lost in the woods. It would have taken quite a while for them to die from exposure. And if you add in the fact that they were searching that area that they were found in pretty extensively within a few days of them going missing. If they had been lost and were only a few kilometers from the road, they would have been found in that search, but they weren't. The next theory that friends and family of the Jameson family predominantly believe is they were kidnapped. That maybe, they were driving on that road and someone flagged them down, whether it was someone they knew or someone that did not seem threatening, that caused them to get out of their car and come over to them, leaving their car the way it was with all of their belongings inside and with their dog inside, shut the door, they're not threatened. They walk over to this person or this group, and then something happens where they are either against their will or they're complicit, and they walk into the woods, never to go back to their truck, and then they ultimately pass away in the woods just a few kilometers away. However, none of those theories can account for the very bizarre video footage that they have of the Jameson family on the day they left their house to go check out the property in Red Oak. So on October 8th, 2009, the video shows Bobby and Sherilyn making multiple trips, about 20 or more, from their house to their truck, where they're loading gear into their truck. But they appear to be almost in a trance, which is what the sheriff said when he first saw the video. They're walking back and forth and they're carrying their stuff into the truck, but periodically they're making trips without carrying anything. They're just walking to the truck with nothing in hand, looking at the truck, and then walking back to the house. And then they come back out and they have something in their hands, and then the next trip they have nothing. And periodically on their trek back and forth, they would just stop and just turn and look off into the distance, not interacting with each other. Bobby and Sherilyn haven't spoken to each other at all. They're just doing this weird trance-like commute back and forth between truck and house before ultimately they load up the truck and they do leave. A lot of people speculated that, well, it looks like Bobby and Sherilyn must have been using drugs. But when they first found the truck and they searched the Jamisons' truck and they searched the Jamison family house, there was no traces of drugs anywhere, and their family said there's no history of drug abuse. There was also a theory that perhaps the Jamison family got tied up in a cult, and that was why they were moving and they were going to live this minimalist lifestyle, and they had brought cash to give to this cult, but in fact they had actually been the target of the cult, and that was what led to their demise. Or maybe they were complicit and they wanted to sacrifice themselves or something, but no one really knows. So these are only a handful of the theories of what could have happened to the Jamison family. So what I want to know is, do you agree with any of them? Or do you have your own theory of what could have happened to the Jamison family? Let me know in the comments. I will get back to all the early commenters, so get in there and give me your best theories. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, then if you haven't done this already, please replace the like button's shampoo with Nair hair remover. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username on both those platforms is JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. And if you have a story suggestion, whether it's your own or if it's just a suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit that's just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. There is a little cottage right on the water in Maryland called Cottage 506. It's a rustic place with a wood fire stove, a couple of small beds, and a small sitting area for breakfast. And then outside the cottage on the porch, you have this amazing view of the water. And then behind the cottage is the resort that the cottage is a part of. And the resort offers guests that stay in this cottage great food, great entertainment. I mean, this is a great spot. However, Cottage 506 has a dark secret. And it's the reason I and many other people will never be staying there. But before we learn about Cottage 506, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to house sit for the like button while they're away for the weekend. But instead of looking after their property, just spend the entire weekend downloading viruses to the like button's computer. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. A little afternoon on Valentine's Day 1998, a married couple named Steve and Kim Rico held hands as they walked towards their car. They had just dropped their 8-year-old daughter off at a neighbor's house in the suburban neighborhood in Maryland where they lived, and now Steve and Kim had the whole weekend to themselves, and they were really excited about it because they had this big trip planned. Now, admittedly, Kim had no idea what they were actually going to be doing because Steve was the one who planned it, and he was obviously being very secretive about the details. He wanted this to be a surprise. And so for weeks leading up to this weekend, Kim would see Steve on the phone all the time, presumably planning whatever it is they were going to be doing, but he wouldn't let Kim hear what he was saying on the phone. He would kind of muffle his voice, or he'd hang up before she could come over and hear him. And then also after these secretive phone calls, Kim would often see Steve writing all these notes down in his journal, presumably about whatever it was he was planning. The only details Steve shared with Kim about this trip was, make sure you wear something nice. When the couple reached their car, Steve hopped in the driver's seat and Kim hopped in the passenger seat, and immediately, right after Steve had fired up the car, Kim turned to him and said, "Are you going to tell me? You going to tell me where we're going?" But Steve just grinned and said, "Nope, it's a surprise." Kim gave a theatrical sigh and sat back and feigned frustration, but inside, the way she was really feeling was just excited. This was so cool that Steve had put so much effort into whatever it is they were going to do, but also Kim was seeing her husband was really making a big effort to make her happy. And this was kind of new because lately their relationship had been really rocky. Kim and Steve had been married for 9 years by this point, and they were both very, very different people. Steve was a total homebody, kind of introverted, and Kim was the opposite. She was super extroverted and very social. But when they first met each other, it was actually their stark differences that brought them together. For Kim, when they met, she was in her early 20s, she had just dropped out of college, and her experience with men so far had been she would meet them at parties or bars, and at first it would seem like their relationship was great, but then invariably these guys would just kind of move on and break Kim's heart. But Steve was different. He was this huge guy, 6'4", massive football player, but he was totally a gentle giant. And as soon as he met Kim, Kim could tell this guy is different. He's treating her with respect, he's loyal to her, he really cares about her, and so they hit it off right away. And Kim very quickly became pregnant, at which point Steve asked her to marry him, and Kim didn't hesitate for a second. They were totally in love. And marriage to Steve had really been a stabilizing factor in Kim's life. She wound up going back to college and got her degree, which landed her a job as a surgical technician, which is what she did now. And Steve turned out to be just a fantastic father, and he wound up actually staying home with their daughter when she was a baby so Kim could go out and work. And Kim always thought it was funny when she would come home and she would see Steve standing in the doorway cradling this infant, but he's like this massive person, and so their baby looked like a toy. But unfortunately, over the last year, Kim had seen a change in Steve. He went from being a shy person, but a person who could go out and function in society, to a shy person who basically stopped going outside altogether. Steve basically refused to go out anywhere with Kim. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He didn't want to spend time with their friends or family. He just wanted to stay home and watch TV or hang out in the basement. I mean, it was pretty obvious he was depressed, but his introvertedness was becoming kind of stifling for Kim. And so Kim approached Steve and said, "You really need to go to therapy to get better here. I'll go with you. We can do couples therapy." But Steve refused. And so finally, right around this past New Year, Kim decided she had just had enough. She was totally unhappy. She did not feel like Steve was going to change. And so Kim told Steve that she wanted to get divorced. And when Steve heard that, he realized the gravity of this situation. He knew Kim was unhappy with him, but he did not know she was thinking about separating. And so Steve kind of broke down and begged Kim to give him another chance. Let him prove to her that he will change, that he wants this marriage to work. And Kim said, okay. And so that was how Steve wound up planning this very secret getaway on Valentine's Day. This trip was supposed to be the start of their new and improved marriage, and so Kim was really excited and optimistic about the future. After driving for about an hour and a half, Steve pulled off the highway and began following signs towards the Eastern Shore, which is a waterfront area of Maryland that's very beautiful, that was located about 70 miles away from Steve and Kim's home. After driving for a few minutes, Steve pulled into the parking lot of the Harbortown Golf Resort. And as soon as he pulled into a spot and turned off the car, he clapped his hands and turned to Kim and said, "Okay, we're here." And Kim looked from her husband out to all the perfectly manicured grounds and the beautiful resort, and she smiled and leapt out of the car excitedly. Kim and Steve took each other's hands and marched inside to check in, and as they were checking in, the person behind the desk gave them glasses of champagne, and then after handing Kim and Steve their key cards, the receptionist told them that their cottage where they were staying was like the nicest property at the resort. Kim and Steve were totally pumped. They took their champagne and their room keys, they walked back to their car, and then drove a little ways deeper into the resort to their cottage. It was cottage 506, and it looked out over the water, and when they went inside, Kim was totally wowed. It was this rustic suite with a wood fire stove in the middle and 2 queen-size beds and a little coffee table area for breakfast over here. It was perfect. And then when Kim actually walked into this cottage, she noticed there was a card sitting on a table, and it looked like a wedding invitation. Kim was confused and looked over at Steve, and Steve just smiled and said, "Go, check it out." And so Kim walked over and she grabbed the note and she began reading it, and as she did, she began to smile. The card really was a wedding invitation, albeit it was for a fake wedding, because it would turn out this was not just a random overnight that Steve had planned for both of them. Instead, he had purchased a romantic getaway package, which included this amazing cottage, but also a professional dinner theater performance that would be held on the resort grounds. Kim read the description of the dinner theater show on this invitation. It was a murder mystery called The Bride Who Cried, where the actors in the show would put on a whole fake wedding, and then at the end of the wedding, somebody would get killed, and the audience would need to figure out who did it. For an extrovert like Kim, an activity like this was perfect. And so Kim felt totally touched that clearly Steve had heard her, and the first thing he did to kind of win her back was to begin to do the things that Kim really wanted to do, which was really going out and having fun. And so after Kim finished reading the card, she turned and looked over at Steve, and Steve was kind of nervous because he wasn't sure if Kim was going to like it. And Kim, she broke into this huge smile. She walked over to Steve and gave him a big hug. And Steve, he was so happy, and he hugged her real tight right back. Kim and Steve would spend the next couple of hours sitting by their fire inside of their nice cottage, drinking their champagne and talking about the future and just telling stories and having a good time. And then around 7 p.m., Steve and Kim put on their nicest clothes and walked their way over to the area on the resort where this dinner theater was going to happen. It was in an event hall with a bunch of round tables set up for the audience. And so once Steve and Kim and the other audience members all took their seats, the actors and actresses came into the room, and they were all dressed in their wedding clothes. There was a bride and a groom and a wedding party, and the audience was instructed to participate in the wedding as if they were wedding guests. And so the audience all stood up, and they began kind of having this fake social hour of meeting all the wedding guests. And then Steve, Kim, and the audience members all took their seats, and they got ready to watch the drama unfold. And Kim, pretty much immediately, was totally absorbed in this performance. She was so enthusiastic, talking to the actors and talking to the other guests, and really pretending like she was part of the wedding. I mean, she was having a blast. The play itself was about a groom who was in the mafia, who was forcing his bride to marry him by threatening her family. The climax came when the groom stood up and gave a toast with his champagne. He took a sip and then fell down dead. Kim watched all of this with delight, but she kept looking over at Steve, hoping he too would be smiling and having a good time. But each time she looked at him, he was just kind of stone-faced and looking straight ahead, like he just didn't care or he was totally disinterested. And then a couple of times when Kim leaned over and said, "Hey, honey, who do you think did it? Who do you think the killer is?" Steve basically just completely ignored her. It was like she wasn't there and the play wasn't there. He was just totally zoned out. Eventually, Kim and a few other very enthusiastic audience members figured out the killer in the play was the bride's mother, who poisoned the groom, and then after this discovery was made, the play was over. As everyone got up from their seats and began to leave, Kim couldn't help but feel really annoyed with Steve because he was just so silent and not invested in this play. And it's like, we came all the way here. Why aren't you at least pretending to enjoy this? But Kim also thought, Steve put a ton of effort into this weekend. He's clearly trying. I'm not going to start a fight. I'm not going to bring it up. And so finally, Kim just said to Steve, "Hey, why don't we go to the bar and get a couple of drinks, bring them back to our cottage, and just hang out there for the night?" And when Steve heard this, he actually smiled and said, "Okay, great, let's do it." And by the time the couple got back to the front door of cottage 506, they were holding hands again and laughing and telling stories. And they went inside and Steve put the beers down on the table. And then Kim said she was going to go in the bedroom and just quickly change into something more comfortable. And so Kim walked into the bedroom and shut the door, and Steve walked to the front door and turned the lock. Hey everybody, if you've not heard by now, last week we made a major announcement. Our flagship podcast, MrBallen Podcast, Strange, Dark, and Mysterious Stories, that pretty much immediately rocketed to the top of the charts when we launched in 2022, and then quickly was scooped up by Amazon by the end of the same year. Yeah, that show, our top show, is now available everywhere. It is no longer just on Amazon Music. It's on all platforms and it's free, which means if you've not listened to this podcast since it went exclusive with Amazon Music back in November of 2022, then that means you have about 100 new stories that are only on the podcast that are only now being made available to everybody. So go binge them. And if you signed up for Amazon Music just for this podcast, I love you. Thank you so much. But most importantly, there are still going to be perks for you if you continue to listen to the podcast on Amazon Music. Prime members will get to listen to the MrBallen podcast 30 days earlier than everybody else, and Prime members will get to listen to the podcast on Amazon Music with no ads. But again, The MrBallen podcast is now available worldwide on every podcast platform, and it's totally free. So please, if you would, go find the MrBallen podcast on your choice podcast platform, whether that's Amazon Music or Spotify or Apple or whatever. Give us a follow, listen to an episode, and then please rate the podcast and leave a review. It does an enormous amount for the growth of the show. I'd really appreciate it. All right, back to the stories. 3 hours later, a man named Philip Parker, who was staying at the resort with his family, heard a commotion in the lobby, and he heard people saying there might be a fire at cottage 506 and there could be somebody still inside. Philip immediately turned to his cousin who was with him, and the two of them bolted outside and just started running towards cottage 506. And as soon as they got to a place where they could see the cottage from a distance, they could see black, oily smoke pouring out of the windows. When they got up to the burning cottage, Philip ran to the front door, but it was locked. He couldn't get inside. He screamed to see if anybody was in there, but there was no answer. And so Philip and the cousin ran around to the back of the cottage where there was a glass sliding door, and Philip, he tried the handle, but it was locked. At this point, the cousin said he was going to run back to the resort and get a fire extinguisher, and after the cousin ran off, Philip turned back towards the sliding glass door and realized it actually opened on both ends, and he had only checked one side and found that side to be locked, but on the other side, which he was now noticing, it was obviously unlocked because it was open just barely. And so Philip immediately opened it up and all the smoke began coming out, and so Philip dropped down to get a better look because down low the smoke had not fully settled. There was a bit of an air pocket right at the bottom of the floor, and so Philip got down and he looked inside, and for a second he couldn't quite see anything, but then he noticed in the middle of the bedroom, right inside this cottage, he could clearly see somebody's feet. Somebody was on the ground. And so Philip screamed that he was coming in, and then he opened the door the rest of the way, and he began low crawling into the bedroom. And as he did, he was hacking and coughing from all the smoke. And so finally, Philip reached this person, and he grabbed their foot, and he shook them to try to wake them up. But they weren't moving. But the fire was getting bigger and stronger. The smoke was getting thicker. Philip was really starting to panic and was worried that he too would get trapped in here. And so he just grabbed this person's leg and began pulling them. And it was really hard, but he finally got this person back to the door. He couldn't quite get them over that lip of where the sliding door was. But right then, Philip's cousin showed up, and the two of them were able to grab this person and get them out of the cottage. And this was the moment when Philip finally got a look at the person he was just dragging out, and it was immediately clear to him that this person was deceased. Their face was basically gone. It was completely burned away. In the days and weeks leading up to this weekend, Steve really was taking secret phone calls and writing notes down in his journal because he was planning something very special. But he was not the only one with plans for this weekend. Here's what police say happened after Kim and Steve got back to their cottage following the show, and Kim went into the bedroom to change, and Steve went to the front door and locked it. A couple of minutes later, Kim came out of the bedroom wearing something sexy, and she looked at Steve and smiled and said, "Come on, get in bed. I'll join you in a second." And so Steve's like, "Great, my plan is working. We're gonna reconnect here." He climbed in bed and he laid down. And Kim, she walked over and got something out of her bag, and then she walked back over to the bed and she pulled out a syringe and she stabbed it into Steve before he could do anything, and she injected him with something called succinylcholine. Kim had access to this drug from her job as a surgical tech. Succinylcholine is used to relax people's muscles during surgery, but if you give someone too big a dose, it can stop their breathing. And this drug works pretty much instantly, which means Steve would have seen his wife stab him with that syringe, but then instantly he would have been totally paralyzed, but fully awake and fully alive. And so as he was laying there, he would have seen his wife put the syringe down and then grabbed lighter fluid and then walked over to him and calmly poured the lighter fluid all over Steve's face and chest. And then one of Steve's final images he likely saw before his lungs stopped working and he died was his wife striking a match and lighting him on fire. After lighting Steve on fire, Kim casually walked out the back sliding door. She shut it, leaving it open just a crack, and then she made her way to the resort lobby where she put on this big act about how her cottage was on fire and she thinks her husband was still inside. And Philip overheard Kim say that her husband might be inside the cottage, which is when he and his cousin jumped into action. They ran to the cottage and ultimately found Steve deceased inside of the cottage. Ultimately, Kim never intended to give Steve a second chance in their marriage. She was already having an affair with a much younger man who was in the Marines, and she was just done with Steve. And so as Steve began telling his friends and family how he was going to make a huge effort to save his marriage, Kim was going around to her friends and literally openly talking about how she wanted to murder her husband. But nobody took her seriously. They thought she was just kind of venting and being kind of dramatic. But as soon as the news broke that Steve had died in this fire and Kim had not, people rushed to the police to tell them, pretty sure Kim had something to do with this. Kim was convicted of her husband's murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison. It would turn out the primary reason why Steve was so secretive before going on this trip was he really wanted it to be this unbelievably special, romantic, kind of like recreation of the couple's first date. And so what he was doing is he was calling all of Kim's friends and family members and asking them questions about things Kim liked because he wanted to incorporate all of her interests in this trip. And then after these calls, when Steve was writing in his journal, that was not just writing down like logistics of the trip. He was also writing down how much he loved Kim and how excited he was for their future and what they would build together as a family. I mean, Steve really believed they were on a path to reconciliation, but of course, that just was not the case. This past week, we dropped a brand new merch line to commemorate Valentine's Day 2024, and people are loving it. Our designers put together, in my opinion, one of the very best graphics we've ever put on any merchandise, and it's right here. So this is the hoodie. This is the back of the hoodie. I think that's just an amazing design. And then the front of the hoodie, it just says Valentine's Day. And the t-shirt has the same design setup as well. But the deal with this merch is it's only available to be purchased for a very short amount of time. And so you have now until Wednesday, February 21st, so just a couple of days from now, that is the last day you can pick up your official Valentine's Day 2024 merchandise. All you have to do is go to shop.MrBallen.com and you can buy your Valentine's Day merch, or you can also check out the Ballen Basics line, which is our, everyday merchandise we sell year round. So again, shop.MrBallen.com. Enjoy. So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's story, be sure to check out our podcast called the MrBallen Podcast, which has hundreds of stories, a lot like this one, but many of them are only on the podcast. Again, it's called the MrBallen Podcast, and it's available wherever you get your podcasts for free, or you can listen early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Wait, don't go anywhere. If you're looking for more strange, dark, and mysterious videos, click here. What's up, everybody? My name is John Allen. I was a Navy SEAL for a little while, and then I got out and became a scary storyteller on the internet under the name MrBallen. I'm 31. I've been married to my wife, Amanda, for almost 10 years. We met in college, and we have 2 daughters, and we're about to have our son literally next week. So, fingers crossed that goes well. A couple of weeks ago, I put a story out on my Instagram that just asked, hey, if you have any questions for me, I'm going to do a Q&A on my YouTube channel. And I was just floored by the number of questions people had for me. It was incredibly flattering, so thank you. I kind of did the easy button and generalized questions that were being asked more than once and created a list of questions that I'm going to go through on this video today. Before we get started, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please push the like button into the Grand Canyon, and also subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get going. First question, where did I grow up? So I grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts. It's a town just south of Boston, about 10 minutes south, about 100,000 people that live there. It's a fierce New England sports town. Red Sox, Bruins, Patriots, Celtics. Somebody asked me about my famous while we're young mother story. When I was in high school in Quincy, I had a homeroom period in my schedule, basically a free time period, where I was in the same room as one of my older sister's really close friends. And I just naturally sat next to her. There was nothing going on between us. I knew her because she's friends with my sister. And apparently her boyfriend really took exception to that. He thought that I was like hitting on her and trying to take her away from him. And I wasn't. I didn't even know this was going on. But either way, apparently it got out that I was like, hitting on his girlfriend. And so I was challenged to a fight. So Quincy, it's interesting because when I was growing up, street fighting was like a really big part of the culture. It was like a time-honored tradition that at some point you're probably gonna get into a fist fight with somebody and you gotta like defend your honor, that's just how it was. And the people I hung out with, my circle of friends, these guys are tough, okay? Everybody knew these guys were tough in Quincy. I wasn't tough. I was around the tough guys. I wasn't a tough guy. And but I thought of myself as being, very tough. And so when it came up that Paul wanted to fight me, I'm like, I'm gonna beat the shit out of this guy. And I was like so confident. Never been in a fight. I've been around other people fighting, but not my own. And so the fight was scheduled for the day before Thanksgiving. This is my sophomore year of high school, and Paul was a junior. I remember on the day of the fight, I'm in the halls of my high school, and Paul was like this big time hockey player, and he's like the captain of the team, whatever. And I was talking so much crap about Paul, people started to kind of buy into the hype that I was like this secret tough guy, especially because the people I was around. And like all day in the halls, I'm like talking so much crap about Paul, and people would come up to me and be like, hey man, you gotta take it easy on Paul, dude. Like, he's a good guy. Like, don't hurt him. We need him. We need him for the hockey season, okay? Please don't hurt him. I'm like, yeah, I'll try not to hurt him. So we get up to this field, and I show up with this huge posse. 50 people that show up with me, and I'm like, shadow boxing. I'm such an idiot. I'm like so cocky. We get up there, and Paul's not there yet. And I'm like, this guy's pathetic. He's afraid of me. He's not even gonna make it here. And so like half an hour goes by, and I'm getting even more confident. Like, yeah, he's just scared of me. And then, of course, Paul shows up with no posse. He shows up with one guy, calm as can be, and he gets out and walks up this hill to where I am. I'm like, at the top of this hill, getting ready. And I have this line where he's getting closer and closer to me, and he's late, remember? And as he's getting closer to me, I go, while we're young, motherfucker. Like as if I'm gonna beat him up, and then he's been so late. He proceeds to beat the shit out of me. The absolute shit out of me. In front of the whole school. And everybody heard me say my big line. Like, it was so outrageous that, like, not only did all of my peers know me for this, but even my teachers would come up to me like, hey man, how was that fight yesterday? So that was Quincy. That's Quincy in a nutshell. So the next question was, what inspired me to ultimately leave Quincy and become a Navy SEAL? Obviously to compensate for the loss to Paul. No, the truth is, I came from a family that was really, really successful. I came from a family where academic achievement was always heralded as kind of the pinnacle of success. And while I certainly had the aptitude to be a good student, I instead was busy getting my ass kicked by Paul on the day before Thanksgiving. No, I rebelled, I didn't want to be an academic. But my way of rebelling was not to like put my energy into something else and be good at it. It was just to like be a lousy student and call that rebellion. And so by the end of high school, I had kind of so-so grades. I was a good baseball player growing up, but by the time I got to my senior year, it was like, So I kind of squandered baseball because I stopped really trying at all. My grades were pretty bad. And I just realized that, I've kind of done nothing with my life. My mom, who's a professional writer, she ended up getting me into college. She wrote my college essay. And in fact, my grades were so bad, but my essay was so good that the college reached out to me and they were like, hey, you're kind of a non-traditional candidate here because your grades are awful. But your essay was so good, you can come to our school. And so I got accepted into the University of Massachusetts, located in Amherst, Massachusetts. I get to Amherst and I promptly fail out effectively after one semester. I was spending my time not going to class, and that's pretty much it. There was a big riot on campus that I may or may not have been involved in, and there were some images of me. And so I had to withdraw from the school to avoid failing out / getting in trouble for this riot. And I remember I came back home and I'm literally living in my mother's basement, and it really dawned on me now that like I hadn't done much at the end of high school and my mom had hooked it up and got me into college. Now I've blown that too. I remember feeling so pathetic. What have you done here? You are a joke. So I decided that I didn't want to be a failure anymore. I wanted to do something with my life, and I figured the first step is graduating college. And so I ended up getting into another school locally in Boston, so the University of Massachusetts, Boston, so different campus. For 3 semesters went there. I worked at a gym in the morning at like 5 a.m., checking people into a gym, and then I would take the train in to Boston, take some classes there, and then I'd come home and stay in my mom's basement. It was a really important time in my life because it was like the first time I was holding myself accountable. I had no sympathy from my mom or my parents. They're like, you screwed it up. You can figure out college, do whatever you gotta do, but you're getting your life together on your own, which was something I needed in my life for sure. It was around this time that I started thinking about the military, because a lot of my friends in high school had joined the Marine Corps and gone overseas to Iraq and to Afghanistan, and I really idolized them. And I always had a real interest in the military, and it was around this time, these formative years, where my mom, of all people, her best friend's 2 brothers were both retiring Navy SEALs. And my mom was like, well, why don't you go talk to them about the military? And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. I've like played Navy SEALs in video games. And so I went and met with them, and I was just so taken with them as people. The thing with Navy SEAL training, if you don't know anything about it, it's incredibly accessible. Anybody, for the most part, can try out, but almost no one makes it through the rigorous training. I'm generalizing, but that's kind of how it works. So in order to succeed in the training pipeline, which is very long, very difficult, you just got to be able to suck it up and suffer for a really long time. And if you make it through all that, you can become a Navy SEAL. And it's kind of like you're reborn in a way. And that's the way they were talking about becoming a SEAL. It's like whoever you were before you became a SEAL kind of goes away and you become something new. And it really spoke to me. And I was at that point in my life where I was just starting to get my life back together, taking classes and trying to graduate. And it just seemed like I had suddenly discovered the thing that was perfect for me. If I could just get through Navy SEAL training, I could be in the military, which is something I was interested in. I would be able to also kind of overwrite a lot of the bad decisions I had made and a lot of the mediocrity in my life, so that when people look back at me, it will not be the guy that could have done a bunch of things but ultimately didn't. And it would instead be, man, that John Allen, he really got his act together. And that worked for me. That was enough. But I stuck to college. I did end up graduating college. I would actually go back to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in Western Mass. That's where I'd meet my wife, Amanda. We started dating while I was out there, and I graduated college, and then I immediately went to a recruiter and I joined the Navy and went off to SEAL training. The training to become a SEAL, it's very, very long. Basically almost 2 years of training. 15% of people will be successful and actually become SEALs. But you got to remember that the initial pool of people that are in that statistic are highly qualified. One of the questions was, what's the hardest part of SEAL training? For me personally was a test called Pool Comp, where it's about the halfway point of selection phase, which is called BUDS, or Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. And there's a 20-minute test where you basically show that you can withstand an underwater emergency with your scuba tanks on. So really what happens is you go underwater and you stay there for 20 minutes while instructors come down and turn your air off and rip the hoses out of your mouth. But every time they're like assaulting you, you got to go in the fetal position and like wait for them to stop tying knots in your hoses. You might see your mouthpiece over here, but you got to go through the same procedures. Reach back, you do all these different things to regain your air source. So you end up becoming quite hypoxic, so you're very low on oxygen. And so of the 20-minute test, really you're spending about half of that without air. Really the whole point of the test is, do the procedures, but show you can keep your composure. And I was just horrible at this test. Full panic mode, like no composure. I was like the poster child of what not to do. But I ultimately, on the day that I passed, I kind of went in the pool with this reckless abandon, like, you know what? I'm just gonna go in there and drown. That's my approach. And it made it pretty simple. Like, I just don't care anymore. I'm gonna just go in the pool and do these stupid procedures and probably drown. And believe it or not, that was enough for me. One of the more popular questions was, what was my scariest or most difficult experience as a Navy SEAL? And so I have one that stands out above all others, and it's actually what ultimately led to me leaving the SEAL teams. And that was when I got blown up in Afghanistan in 2014. We're in this area in Afghanistan that was definitely a bad guy town. We had gone in during the day and started getting shot at. A couple of our partner force had gotten shot, our dog got shot. It was a bad start to the day. And over the course of about 6 hours, we were kind of fighting rooftop to rooftop with these people that just kept vanishing. And by the end of the night, we were getting ready to leave this little city. We had all we, as in our SEAL team, our platoon, had broken up into little groups called fire teams, like pockets of 5, 6 people out of the 25 of us that were there. And my fire team, not mine like I was in charge, I was just in this fire team. We were located on a section of the city, kind of closer to the exit of the city. And as we're getting ready to leave, one of our drones spots a group of people, not Americans, not SEALs, that are located near the exit, and our fire team was nearest to them. And so we decided, our fire team, we would just go over and scout out who these people were, because we've been getting shot at all day and we don't know where people are anymore, and we're worried that if we don't inspect this group, that they could be planning an attack on us when we try to leave, because we're getting ready to leave here. So we end up walking down this alleyway, and we're going down this like T alleyway. When we get down the stem here and reach the head of the T, if you will, we're expecting to be able to look over this wall and look out across this field and see this group of men that are hiding. But when we got down to the end of the alleyway, they weren't across the field on that wall. They were on this wall, like a foot away from us, on the immediate other side of the wall. And they hadn't heard us sneak up, and they were, enemy combatants, and they had grenades with the pins already pulled out as a defensive mechanism in case they were compromised. And in the craziest few seconds of my life, grenades are coming over the wall, there's shooting happening on both sides. The grenade actually came over and hit my shoulder and landed next to me and detonated. And I remember kind of getting up and looking around, and it's just chaos. We're in this like tight little alleyway, and there's just gunfire everywhere. And I was just expecting to either die from bleeding or have one of the bad guys come from around the wall and finish me off. I tried to stand, I couldn't stand. Somebody came over and dragged me around down that T section. I'm down here now. And so he told me to put my tourniquets on. It's a device that helps you stop bleeding. And then he went back down to help other people. I couldn't get my tourniquets off of my kit. I couldn't put them on. I was bleeding to death. And I remember thinking about my wife, and I went deaf and blind. And I remember being like, I'm gonna die in Afghanistan. It was not so much a matter of will I die, so much as I'm currently dying. It's interesting, your body, your brain is acutely aware when something really bad is happening, and it's more matter of fact than anything else. As I'm preparing to die, I remember just wishing that my wife and I had started a family before I deployed, because we actually kind of pushed it off and said, let's get through a deployment, and then, when you come back, we can think about having kids. And so I just was like, man, I wish I had started a family. And then I passed out thinking that would be the end. But my medic was an all-star. He ran over, and while I'm laying there, was able to stop the bleed. My interpreter laid over me and protected me, because we're still in the middle of a gunfight. I was worthless. My teammates were able to call in airstrikes and call in medical support, and we were able to hightail our way out of there, and I was saved thanks entirely to my team. The most popular question is, how did I become inspired to go from all that to telling scary stories on the internet? It's been a bit of a journey. I got medically retired in 2017, and I co-founded and was the CEO of a charity called Elite Meet, which is this organization that helps Navy SEALs and other elite special operators get jobs in the private sector. It was built in large part to help me get a job. Ironically, my job became running a service that helps people get jobs. But I did that for a few years. I'm still on the board of Elite Meet. I also co-founded a kind of the opposite of Elite Meet. It's called Operators Association, and it helps aspiring special operators. It's like a mentorship platform for them. It's on Patreon, and we help them become special operators. So kind of hitting on both ends of the spectrum, and I'm still a partner over there. And so while I was building those two companies, I saw a need to really leverage social media to get the word out about your companies and what you're doing. That's what everybody does. And so my go-to was sharing my experience as a Navy SEAL and talking about my Navy SEAL experience and drawing people onto my pages that way, and then kind of funneling them to my other business ventures that are both military related. But it was really difficult because the topics I was talking about You know, it draws a lot of negativity from the active duty community that are in the SEAL teams. They don't necessarily like it when people like me are talking, you know, about being a Navy SEAL and all the things I've done, because it comes off as very self-centered and very like, look at me, look how great I am. And I'm not acting like I wasn't doing that in my posts, but it's a bad look, and I started getting a lot of negativity from some people in the community. You know, I was mad about it, and I felt betrayed, but ultimately, you know, I made my own decisions. You know, I chose to do what I was doing and decided that all I can do is maybe try to change my content style and focus on something else. I also just felt like I was running out of stories to tell. And so for a lot of reasons, I didn't want to be doing what I was doing, which was a lot of Navy SEAL centered content. And on a whim, I posted a story on TikTok about the Dyatlov Pass incident. These Russian hikers go off into the wilderness, get lost, and everybody speculates that like some monster killed them or something. I'm interested in this. I've always been interested in spooky, you know, mysterious stuff. I find myself researching that on my own. So I'm just interested in this. And so like out of left field, I'm doing like Navy SEAL content, Navy SEAL content, Navy SEAL content, Dyatlov Pass, Russian hikers go missing in the mountains in the 1950s. But it went viral on TikTok. So I was like, that's great, I'll do another one. And I started posting some stories, more and more stories about like scary stuff and mysterious unsolved mysteries. And it really took off. I think in part because I'm really, really passionate about telling stories, one, but specifically I'm really interested in strange, dark, and mysterious content because I had either a really intense sleep paralysis story or a paranormal one, or maybe some combination, but you can check it out. It's one of my more popular videos on my YouTube channel. It's just what I saw in my room still haunts me. My TikTok really blew up. It's at 6.6 million followers now, which is just mind blowing to me. And I've transitioned over to YouTube so that I can make this a career. I can actually go full time on YouTube, and that's what I've been doing now for the past 2 months. A lot of people ask, what is it like to be a YouTuber? It's unbelievable how much time goes into this. I love doing it. So this is not me complaining, it's the opposite, but all I think about is YouTube. That is all I think about. I wake up, I'm on YouTube. I'm watching YouTube, I'm thinking about YouTube, I'm watching tutorials on how to be a better speaker, how to be a better YouTuber, and then I'm pouring into documents that I've been saving and articles I'm supposed to read, and every day I'm probably spending I don't know, 5 hours of research for that day's video, even if I already know it. I'll spend 5 hours just researching it and internalizing the story. I spend about an hour to maybe even an hour and a half actually filming it. I do a single take on my iPhone. I film everything on my iPhone. I don't have a script. Now, let me be clear here. I do write a script, but the best way to tell a story, in my opinion, is to be the story, be in the story. And you can't do that if you're reciting a script. And so I like internalize the story. That's why it takes me so many hours to really get ready for a story. I need to really feel like I'm in it. And so the script serves as more like a guide, but I'll look at a script, I'll think about it, and then I'll tell the story. So I would say for any video, it takes about 6 to 7 hours just from, okay, I have the idea, research it, internalize it, shoot it, and then I spend another 2 hours at night doing the rough cut edit, not even the full edit. I kick it to my amazing editor. Shout out to Wes J. Adams. He's my guy. Shout out to you, Wes. He takes the rough cut and he puts in the imagery and he makes it much sexier, and then we upload it the next day. And since I'm posting 5 days a week, we have to be on a schedule where we're always a couple posts ahead. So pretty much there is no off time with the exception of maybe Saturday. But it's a really, I feel like I'm in such a privileged position. I love doing this. I'm proud of what I'm doing, and it's just so much fun to do something that I so fundamentally enjoy doing. So a couple fun facts about me. I use little tech decks, little hand skateboards. I have like little ramps and stuff. I'll literally sit here and like flip around with my tech deck the whole time to like jog my creative mind. Also on the notion of little skateboards, I was world ranked in the game Skate. It's a video game on PlayStation 3, Skate 1 and Skate 2. I was literally in the top 30. It's a game where you would like do a trick and then somebody else tries to match your trick. If they can't match it, they get a letter until they spell out SKATE and then they lose. I was playing this all the time when I was in college, and I didn't even know I was so good at it. And I was just beating everybody. And I started getting all these notifications from people being like, dude, you're not even that good.
Like, my brother played you last night. You weren't even that good, man. I don't know how you're like world ranked. And I went to the leaderboard and there I was. So, but when I do have some spare time, I do like gaming. I mostly just play offline. You know, I'm 31. I'm not like big into online gaming. Didn't really grow up with it. But I'll play like sports games. Like, I love MLB The Show, huge baseball fan. But like, I don't really play the game. I just like edit the rosters and perfect everything about the rosters to where, like, you know, make sure their cleats are the right color and that their numbers are right and their stats are right. Like, it's almost like I'm taking a sports game and turning it into a life simulation. Like, I tell myself I'm going to edit these rosters and make them perfect, and then I'm going to play that game. And then I never get to playing it. I just edit the rosters and then don't play the game. I don't know if this was even an interesting episode or not, but I'm more than happy to do more of these or maybe answer more specific questions, but I think I touched on the big ones. I do want to say that I am just so thankful that I even have this opportunity to have people that actually want to see my videos. It's an incredible thing. I feel so lucky. I really genuinely wish I could get to know every single one of you guys and gals, because this is just, it's a dream come true for me and my family, and I just can't thank you enough. So if you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please push the like button into the Grand Canyon, and also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter, same username for both platforms. It's JohnBallen416. Also, I have a ton of content on TikTok. My username over there is MrBallen. And if you have a story submission, please submit it to our subreddit. It's just called MrBallen. It's linked below. I read that every day. If I intentionally use your story, I will credit you. So whether I see you on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, here on YouTube, or some combination, I'm just incredibly thankful. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. All right, so I wanted to bring you into my dojo where I create all of my content. It's called the Mustard Room. It's pretty high speed, so don't be intimidated. It's my setup. It's nice and neat. This is where all the magic happens, right here. Here's my ring light. There's my little crappy tripod. Got my, I use tech decks when I'm trying to become more creative. Yes, this is my setup right here.
Today, I'm going to tell you a strange, dark, and mysterious medical mystery. And it actually happened really recently, and it's totally insane. There is not another story I've covered that sounds anything like this. And so if you're a fan of medical mysteries like today's story, keep in mind, we actually have an entire show dedicated to medical mysteries. It's called MrBallen's Medical Mysteries. It's a podcast, and it's available on all podcast platforms right now for free. But before we get into this medical mystery episode, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and reverse all their doorknobs so they turn the wrong way. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's medical mystery. On the evening of June 7th, 2023, a 36-year-old man named Umar Abdullah walked into his bedroom in Tampa Bay, Florida, and right away he opened up all the windows. Now, keep in mind, Tampa Bay, Florida is really hot. And so by doing this, he was letting in all this really hot air, but Umar did not care. He just wanted whatever was inside of his apartment out. Umar, along with his wife Samira and their 10-month-old daughter, had just gotten back to their apartment after a trip to Ohio, and the second they walked inside, they had smelled this weird smell. And it was something they had never smelled before. This was not like rotten food or anything like that. This was like a chemical smell, but even that wasn't a good description. It was like a cross between chemicals and maybe paint. And so at first, Umar and Samira just walked around their apartment, predominantly in the kitchen, looking for things that could be leaking, in the fridge or in cupboards or whatever, but they couldn't find anything that seemed like it could be the cause of the smell. And it was around this point, when they were totally stumped, that Umar and Samira remembered that their apartment
apartment building was extremely well taken care of. Like, repairs were done immediately and all the time in every single unit, and the fact that they had been away in Ohio had been known to their apartment manager, and so they thought, maybe while they were gone, maybe somebody had come in here and maybe touched up some paint or made some repairs or something, even though it seemed a bit weird that they hadn't been informed beforehand that, painting or repairs were going to take place in their apartment. But ultimately, that's what they chalked it up to. And so it was at this point that Umar and Samira walked all around the apartment, opening up all the windows, and Samira also lit a candle as well. And pretty soon that weird smell disappeared, and both the parents just kind of forgot about it. And so Umar grabbed all their luggage from their trip and began unpacking it into the drawers and putting toiletries away. And at the same time, Samira put their baby in a high chair in the kitchen, and then Samira began preparing dinner. And a few minutes later, as Umar was still putting things away, he heard Samira calling from the kitchen to, hey, come out here for a second. And so Umar stopped what he was doing. He went into the kitchen and he looked at Samira, and she was looking very concerned down at their daughter. And their daughter was in her high chair and her dinner was right in front of her, but she wasn't eating. And their daughter seemed really fussy. And normally their daughter was such a get-along kid who never fussed, who always ate her food. And so this seemed really out of character. And so both parents kind of stared at the daughter for a second. And then Umar was like, you know what? All the windows are still open and it's getting pretty hot in here. Maybe the baby's just fussy about the heat. And so Samira agreed that could totally be it. And so the parents went around the apartment, closing down all the windows, allowing the air conditioning to kick back on and cool the apartment down. But about an hour later, after the apartment had cooled back down, the baby was still very fussy. And at this point, Umar and Samira were trying to put the baby to bed, and they were really struggling with that. And also, in addition to the baby obviously not feeling very well, Umar and Samira both began to complain that they had headaches. And so at this point, the parents assumed that, you know what, all of this, the baby's behavior and now our headaches must be tied to just the travel we just went through, and we just need a day to recover here. And so they kind of rushed their baby through her bedtime routine and eventually got her down. And then Umar and Samira took some ibuprofen to help with their headaches, and then they too climbed in bed and drifted off to sleep, hoping that when they woke up, everybody would feel better again. But the next morning, nobody was better. In fact, everybody was doing worse. Umar's headache had now gotten much stronger, and Samira, she still had a headache, but also was very lethargic, and the baby was still very fussy. And over the next few days, their symptoms continued to get worse and worse. Umar's headache went from really bad to pretty much blinding, like he couldn't do anything else but think about his headache. And Samira basically had to lay down all day. It was like no matter how much she slept, she had zero energy, and their poor baby just continued to cry and fuss all the time, and even began to vomit. And so it seemed pretty obvious by this point, after a few days, that the three of them must have caught some sort of bug while they were traveling, that this was not just jet lag, that they actually had some sort of illness. But the parents were convinced that, they could just kind of rough it out, and eventually, after a couple of days, they would get better. But on the morning of June 14th, so this is now a week after coming back home from their trip, not only were all their symptoms still really bad, but on this particular morning, things took a dark turn. That morning, when Umar went to his daughter's bedroom, he's still dealing with this horrible headache, he makes his way into the bedroom, and he goes down to pick his daughter up from her crib, and as he's reaching down to grab her, he freezes. Because on the bed, on the pillow right behind the baby, is all the baby's hair. The baby had clearly lost huge chunks of her hair. And so Umar at this point forgot about his headache and yelled for Samira, and even though she's super lethargic, she could tell this is an emergency, so she got up and made her way into the bedroom, and she looked down too and saw all the hair, and she reached down and scooped the baby up, and she turned the baby over, and sure enough, there was a huge bald spot on the back of their baby's head. But Umar and Samira, they said to each other right away that, wait a minute, I know this is scary, but it is actually a thing that newborn babies sometimes do lose their hair. But when they went online and looked at the age range of when that's kind of a common thing to happen, it was pretty obvious that their baby, being 10 months old, was a little bit too old for losing her hair to be considered a normal thing. And so Umar and Samira sat there and continued Googling, what could this be? My 10-month-old baby is losing her hair. And there were lots of explanations ranging from, ringworm to some severe infection to some rare genetic disorder. And all of it was kind of terrifying. And also none of it really lined up with what they were seeing with their daughter. And so the parents were like, you know what? Clearly, we don't know what this is. We've all been sick for a week. We have to bring our baby to the doctor. And so as Samira got on the phone and called the baby's doctor, Umar hopped in the shower to get ready to go to the doctor. And as soon as he began shampooing his hair, he noticed clumps of his hair were falling out. And so all of a sudden it dawned on him that whatever's going on with his baby is going on with him, and very likely going on with his wife too. And it was at this point too that Umar remembered that strange smell when they first walked into their apartment after coming back from their trip. Now, they had opened up all the windows and lit candles, and, the smell had kind of dissipated, and then they had shut the windows again, and they hadn't smelled it again. And so Umar began thinking, wait a minute, maybe we've just gone nose blind to the smell, and maybe there's some sort of contamination in the air. Maybe there's a gas leak or something worse than that. And so as soon as Umar got out of the shower and told his wife about how he lost hair and kind of his theory that maybe there was some contamination in their apartment, Umar called his landlord and explained, the whole situation. And the landlord would tell Umar right off the top that, during the time they were in Ohio, nobody went inside their apartment. So there's no fresh paint in there, no maintenance was done. So whatever you smelled was not from us. And then the landlord said to Umar that, as scary as it sounds, it's possible that you might have like a gas leak inside of your apartment, or maybe you have a freon leak from your air conditioning system, or maybe there's toxic mold. But whatever it is, we're going to get people in there, we're going to find the issue and solve it. And so later that day, sure enough, a gas inspector showed up to Umar and Samira's apartment, and they checked the entire place, and they could not find any trace of a gas leak. They checked everywhere. There was no leak, but they did tell Umar and Samira that yes, we can smell a faint trace of some chemical smell, but we don't think it's gas. And then after the gas inspector left, the landlord went out and found a mold inspector who came into Umar and Samira's apartment. They looked everywhere and could not find any mold. Then the landlord brought in a plumber to check the hot water heater, but no issues with that. Then the landlord brought an HVAC company in, and they checked the air conditioning units, and there was no leak. And so finally, after the landlord had kind of run out of ideas for who to bring over to check the apartment, because again, by this point, nobody had found anything wrong with the apartment, Umar just said, you know what? I'm going to call the fire department. And so Umar, he calls the fire department, and the fire department, they send over their hazardous materials team or their hazmat team. And so they go into the apartment and they look everywhere, and there is nothing. They could not find any source that was causing the smell at all. It seemed very much like their apartment was totally safe and fine. But by this point, it's now been 2 weeks since Umar, Samira, and their baby had come back from that trip, and they still felt totally horrible. Umar still had his headaches, he was still losing his hair, Samira had begun losing her hair as well, she still had her headaches, she still felt lethargic, and their baby was still losing her hair, and she still was fussy and miserable. And all three of them now had developed this weird shortness of breath, where they'd just be walking through the apartment, and suddenly it was like they couldn't even breathe. And so now they've had all these people who can't find anything wrong with their apartment. They'd gone to their doctors, and the doctors had no idea what was wrong with them. And so it was kind of like they had no idea what to do, but clearly this crisis was only getting worse and worse and worse. And so Umar felt like he had no more options. He couldn't leave his apartment. He couldn't afford to do that. And so they were just stuck in this place that seemed toxic. But all that would change on June 25th, so 2.5 weeks after they came home from that trip, because on this day, Umar discovered something about that chemical smell they caught right when they came back in after the trip. The smell that all the people that had come into the apartment had sort of noticed but couldn't identify. On June 25th, Umar figured something out about that smell. If you don't know this, late last year, we launched a brand new, strange, dark, and mysterious show called MrBallen's Medical Mysteries. And so far, people love it. It is a free weekly show where each week we explore a new baffling mystery originating from the one place we all can't escape, our own bodies. Topics discussed on the show range from obscure diseases and freak occurrences to totally weird medical mishaps that sometimes result in big, amazing discoveries and other times result in just unimaginable suffering and death. So, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, then you really ought to give MrBallen's Medical Mysteries a try. To start listening, go look up and follow MrBallen's Medical Mysteries on any podcast platform, and boom, you're in. You got yourself a new weekly show. But if you're super impatient, like I am, and you can't wait a whole week to get a new episode, well, with your Prime membership, you can listen to an entire batch of 8 episodes at once, because we release them 8 at a time on Amazon Music. Also, on Amazon Music, there are no ads. And if all this was not enough to sell you on maybe giving the show a try, well, then stick around at the end of this video, and I'll play you a sneak peek from our newest episode of MrBallen's Medical Mysteries. Umar was in his apartment feeling completely miserable, as was his wife and his daughter who were in the bedroom. But at some point, Umar suddenly caught a whiff of that weird chemical smell. And as soon as he smelled it, he sort of began to cough, and he was about to call his landlord and be like, "Hey, I smelled it again." But he decided on this day, instead of calling anybody else, he was going to run an experiment of his own. And so instead of trying to get away from the smell, Umar began smelling in the air as deep as he could to try to kind of figure out where the smell was coming from. And so he began walking around his apartment, sniffing the air, kind of tracing the smell, and slowly but surely he began kind of following the smell through his kitchen, down the hallway, all the way to his front door. And when he got to his front door, he smelled in again, and he could tell the smell was the strongest right now. And so feeling a sudden jolt of adrenaline, he grabbed the door, flung it open, half expecting to see like a chemical cloud floating in the air in the hallway. But as soon as he opened the door, there was nothing outside. And when he smelled in the hallway, the smell wasn't really there anymore. And so he kind of looked around for a second, feeling kind of silly, and then he shut the door, and he was about to just go back into his apartment and just kind of accept that, once again, I got no idea what's going on here. But then he stopped, and he turned back around and looked at the actual door, like the actual front door of his apartment. And he began smelling the door. And the door definitely had the chemical smell. And so he began smelling and tracing his hands all over this door, not even sure what he was looking for. But eventually he worked his way all the way to the bottom of the door. And that's when he felt something. And so suddenly Umar got down and stared at the strange thing he had found on his door. And as soon as he saw what it was, he jumped up and ran to his wife to tell her what he had just found. After talking with his wife about this thing, they came up with a plan. Late that night, Umar waited until the entire apartment complex seemed really quiet, and then as quietly as he could, he opened up that front door, he stepped out into the hallway, and then he made his way over to the big fake plant that stood at the end of this hallway that was kind of right outside, kind of adjacent to his door, and he hid something in the plant, and then Umar went back into his apartment and he shut the door. And on June 27th, so 2 days later, the moment Umar and Samira had been waiting for finally arrived. At around 5:30 p.m. that evening, suddenly that chemical smell began to emanate through the apartment, and their baby began coughing so badly she began vomiting. And so as Samira was tending to their baby, Umar very quietly opened up his front door, looked in the hallway, didn't see anyone, and he rushed over to that plant, and he took the thing he had hidden a couple of days before, and he went back into his apartment, shut the door, and went into his office. And when Umar came out of that office a little while later, Samira was waiting, and she was looking at him, and as Umar came out, it was like he was totally ashen-faced, he looked completely shocked, and he could barely speak. And Samira said, "What's going on? What did you learn?" And Umar said, "We have to get out of here right now. Get the baby. We have to leave right now. We're going to the hospital." And so as Samira bundled up their baby and they started getting their things together, Umar called 911 and told the operator what he had just discovered. The strange thing Umar had discovered on his front door 2 days earlier on June 25th was a weird crack at the very base of his door where you could basically see from inside of his apartment out into the hallway. And the thing Umar and his wife had decided to hide in the hallway in that plant was a video camera aimed at their front door because they were suspicious that something was making its way through that crack in the door into their apartment, and they wanted to catch it on camera. And that's exactly what happened 2 days later when around 5:30 p.m., their daughter began coughing and Umar began to smell that smell in the apartment, and he rushed out, he got his camera, he went back into his office, he watched the footage, and he could not believe what his camera had recorded. Just before 5:30 p.m. on June 25th, so right before the smell came into the apartment, on video you see this guy walk up the stairs and enter the hallway right in front of Umar and Samira's apartment door. And this man had a syringe in his hand, and he knelt down and he placed the syringe into that crack at the bottom of Umar and Samira's door, and he pushed the plunger of the syringe before pulling the syringe out, quickly turning and disappearing down the stairs. And so as Umar and Samira and their baby rushed to the hospital after discovering this video and after calling 911 to tell police what they saw on this video, the police rushed to Umar and Samira's apartment complex. Not to go to Umar and Samira's apartment though, instead to go to the apartment right below Umar and Samira. The man who rented that apartment right below them was a 36-year-old named Zuming Lee. He was a married father of two who was working on his PhD in chemistry from the University of South Florida. And Umar and Samira thought of him as being a really nice guy. You know, he was very quiet, he kept to himself. He even gave them a gift after their daughter was born. But on this evening, when the police arrived at Zuming's apartment and knocked on the door, when Zuming opened it up, he was immediately arrested. It would turn out, despite Zuming giving Umar and Samira that gift after their baby was born, well, that was the end of him liking Umar and Samira. Because as soon as they came home with their baby, Zuming became obsessed with how noisy their baby was. Even if their baby was barely being loud, it completely consumed Zuming's mind. It was like he was obsessed with listening for this baby. And then suddenly it wasn't just the baby that annoyed him, it was even the slightest noise he heard above him coming from Umar and Samira's apartment that totally sent him into a rage. And so Zuming began constantly going to the homeowners association to complain about the baby and, the toilet sounds and the footsteps he was hearing. And when that wasn't enough, he began going to the police about it. Now, Umar and Samira had been told that their downstairs neighbor really was upset with how loud they were being, and so they did everything they could to be quiet. They felt so bad that they were coming off as being these very loud and disrespectful people, which they were not. I mean, they did have a little baby, and babies make noise, but I mean, they were doing everything they could to be quiet. And so they had no idea that Zuming was still just completely furious at them. And eventually, Zuming's fury just became completely unhinged, and he used his chemistry know-how, because remember, he's studying for his PhD in chemistry, to begin putting together this deadly mixture of chemicals that contain things like methadone and hydrocodone, and he put them into a syringe, and he began injecting them into Umar and Samira's apartment to poison them, to make them be quiet. And so by the time Zuming was arrested, he had been injecting these deadly chemicals into their apartment for a month. That was obviously the cause of all of Umar and Samira and their baby's symptoms. It was this poison. Umar, Samira, and their baby would get treatment and they would fully recover from their poisoning. But very likely, had they not been quick thinkers and put that camera in place and caught Zuming in the act, it's entirely possible that over time, the poison that was being injected into their apartment would have killed them. Officials are still investigating this case as it's still relatively new. However, the legal process was paused when Zuming was deported back to China. Zuming has not been convicted of any crime, and the criminal case remains open, and if Zuming ever were to step foot on US soil, he would be arrested immediately. Okay, here is the clip from our newest episode of MrBallen's Medical Mysteries. Enjoy.
One day in 2009, a high school janitor was mopping the hallway in between classes when he heard a heavy scraping sound. The janitor looked up and he saw a student slowly walking towards him. The boy's grotesquely swollen right leg dragged along the floor, and he walked with a dramatic limp. The janitor smiled and waved at the boy as he approached. After all, this boy was a familiar sight. It took him so long to get between classes, he would have to leave 10 minutes early just to make it to his next one barely on time. And so the janitor saw him going through this routine all the time. Just then, the bell rang, and more students streamed into the hallway. They jostled past the limping student, knocking him off balance, as a few kids snickered at the boy. For 3 years, the janitor had seen this happen every single day. He wanted to yell at the kids to stop being bullies, but he knew that would only make things worse. So instead, he gave the young man a reassuring pat on the back as he hobbled by, and the janitor just hoped that whatever was wrong with this boy would clear up soon.
So that's the end of today's medical mystery story. If stories like this one appeal to you, remember we have an entire show dedicated to stories just like this one. It's called MrBallen's Medical Mysteries, and it's available on all podcast platforms for free. But you can listen to episodes early and ad-free on Amazon Music. So that's going to do it. Thank you so much for your support. Until next time, see ya. Wait, don't go anywhere. If you're looking for more strange, dark, and mysterious videos, click here.
There are some people that everyone should know about, and one of those people is Jack Churchill. But before we get into Jack's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to come out with you for a nice casual get-together, and when you're about halfway through dinner, start aggressively hard-selling your multi-level marketing scheme. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In 1926, Jack Churchill graduated from one of the UK's most prestigious military academies called Sandhurst, thus becoming an army officer. His first assignment was to an infantry unit stationed in Burma, but when he got there, it was peacetime, so Jack didn't have much to do. But instead of just sitting around all day, Jack did what any other restless young military officer would do, and he mastered the bagpipes, despite being 0% Scottish. He also took a trip across the entire Indian subcontinent on his motorcycle, almost entirely on unpaved roads. But in 1936, despite these incredible side hobbies, he just wasn't really that interested in being a part of the military when there wasn't anything going on, and so he decided to get out. He moved to Nairobi, Kenya, where he became a newspaper editor / male model / movie extra. During his off time, he still took his bagpiping very seriously, placing second in a prominent piping competition in 1938. He also picked up another hobby, archery, and he became so good at it so quickly that he was chosen by England to represent them in the Archery World Championships in 1939. Later that same year, when World War II broke out, Jack decided now's a good time to get back into the army. So he rejoined the army and he was promptly sent to France to help defend their borders against a potential Nazi invasion. But shortly after Jack arrived, Hitler was able to push through those defenses and he launched a brutal blitzkrieg campaign against the Allies in France. Blitzkrieg is a military tactic that's basically an all-out attack all at once with everything you got. So planes, tanks, artillery, infantry, you just send all of it in an attempt to overwhelm your enemy before you run out of resources. And in this case, Hitler's blitzkrieg was successful. In just 6 weeks, they not only invaded France, they conquered it. But during that 6-week battle for France that the Allies ultimately lost, Jack made a name for himself by employing two particular weapons that nobody else in World War II was using. He is the only one who used these weapons for the entirety of World War II. Jack and 2 other infantrymen were up on this hill overlooking this town that was full of Nazis, and at some point 5 Nazis come running out to the edge of this town and they duck behind a wall that's about 30 meters away from Jack. And one of these Nazis stands up and quickly crumples to the ground. And his 4 Nazi comrades look to see what happened to him, and they see a dead man on the ground with the back end of an arrow jutting out of his chest. And that arrow was fired by none other than Jack Churchill. Because for the duration of World War II, he didn't carry a gun. He didn't need a gun. Instead, he carried a bow and arrow and a long broadsword. Although periodically he would scoop the weapons up off of dead enemy soldiers, and he would fire those. When asked why he didn't just carry a gun in the first place, he responded, "Any officer that goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." From then on, he became Mad Jack, and his peers loved him. But his leadership hated him. They said he was setting a terrible example, that no one should be running around with a sword and a bow and arrow. But he was so effective, they let him continue. Throughout the brutal 6-week battle for France, Jack would lead dozens of these small raids against the Nazis, and he would just pick them off one by one with his bow and arrow and with his sword. And in one particular raid, he got shot through the neck, but he was so nonchalant about it that when he got back to base, someone was like, "Hey, Jack, you're bleeding." And he was like, "Oh, yeah, I am." They were like, "Well, what happened?" He's like, machine gun. After the Allies finally lost this battle for France and were forced to evacuate, they found a diary from one of the British soldiers, and in it he talks about the one thing that motivated him and the other troops around him, and that was the sight of Mad Jack running hither and thither with his bow and arrow and his broadsword. For his bravery in France, Jack was awarded the Military Cross. After leaving France, Jack heard about this new unit, the Commandos, that was being stood up to aggressively sabotage Nazi operations, and they were looking for volunteers. And Jack didn't know much about what they were going to do, but they promised combat, and so he was all for it, and he volunteered. The commando unit would go on to become the famous British Special Forces, and the training they put Jack and the other volunteers through was absolutely brutal. And Jack just loved it. He loved being in the commandos. After graduation in 1941, Jack was put in command of a commando unit that was tasked with going to this Norwegian town of Vågsøy and taking down a Nazi garrison there. And so they loaded up into their amphibious landing craft, and Jack's got his kilt on, and he's got his bagpipes, and he plays the bagpipes on the entire transit over to Vogsoy to pump up the commandos. And then Jack's landing craft was the first to reach the shores, and when its ramp came down, Jack was the first off, and he just kept playing his bagpipes, despite the fact that the Nazis now see them, and they're shooting at them. So rounds are impacting around him as he's blaring his bagpipes, and only when he finished his song did he shoulder his bagpipes, pull out a grenade. He saw some Nazis running along the ridgeline. He throws a grenade at them, and pulls out his sword and runs into battle. In just a few hours, the Nazi garrison had fallen, and Jack was awarded his second military cross. During the Italian amphibious landings in 1943, Jack again was in charge of a commando unit, and they were tasked with capturing a Nazi observation post that was in this town just outside of Salerno. It was well defended and fortified, and Jack and his men were outnumbered 20-1. So Jack came up with a genius plan. Instead of using stealth tactics, he broke his small team into 6 different groups, and he placed them all around the outside of this town. And it was nighttime, so the Nazis did not see them setting up. And then on Jack's call, he had them all yell out at the exact same time, "Commando!" And the Nazis in the town were so caught off guard by all this yelling coming from all around them, they assumed a huge force is coming to take over this town. And so they went on the defensive. And so after their big war cry, Jack and his group are the first to charge down into this town, and Jack and one other guy would actually splinter off, and they would discover this big group of Nazis that were setting up their mortars. And so Jack and this guy sneak up behind one of them, and Jack grabs him from behind, holds this sword to his throat, and orders him to tell the rest of the team to surrender. And so the rest of the team, who vastly outnumber Jack and the other guy, they turn around and they see this lunatic wearing a kilt, wielding a sword. He's got bagpipes slung over his shoulder along with a bow and arrow. And they're like, okay, we give up. Shortly after, the rest of the Nazis in this town would surrender to Jack and his men, and for his actions, Jack would be awarded the Distinguished Service Order. In 1944, Jack was in Yugoslavia with the commandos trying to capture a strategically valuable location called Point 62. And when every man in his team was either killed or severely wounded, and when Jack had run out of arrows, instead of surrendering, he pulled out his bagpipes and started playing until a grenade detonated behind him, knocking him unconscious. The Nazis captured him and sent him to Berlin to be interrogated because they believed, because of his last name, Churchill, that he was connected to or related to the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. He wasn't, not at all, so they ordered Jack to be sent to a concentration camp. On his way out of Berlin, Jack secretly flicked a lit cigarette butt into one of his interrogators' offices, and he lit it on fire, but nobody knew it was him. And so Jack arrives at this concentration camp, and he's only there for a couple of months before he and another British military officer managed to escape by crawling underneath one of the barbed wire fences. They had slowly burrowed a tunnel without anybody noticing, and then they jumped down into this abandoned drainage pipe, and they crawled out to freedom that way. But their freedom would be short-lived because they only made it a couple of miles before they were recaptured by the Nazis. And so they were ordered to go to another concentration camp that was considered much more secure. But after only having been at this new concentration camp for less than a year, once again, Jack was able to escape. This time it was because there was a power outage at the camp, and Jack just put his shovel down and casually walked out the front gates, and nobody noticed. He walked 150 miles in the treacherous terrain of the Alps, surviving on vegetables he had stolen from people's gardens, and then finally, 8 days later, he came across a United States Armored Division, and they took him in and reconnected him with British troops, and then he was ultimately sent back to England. And while Jack was free, he was very frustrated that the war in Europe was effectively over, and he had missed most of it. And so he requested a transfer to go out to Burma to fight against the Japanese in the Pacific Theater, but as soon as he got there, the Americans had just dropped the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, Japan, abruptly ending World War II. And when Jack heard about this, he was so disappointed he would not get to do any more fighting. He was quoted as saying, if it wasn't for those Yanks, we could have kept this war going for another 10 years. Even though the war was over, Jack desperately wanted to get into combat at least one more time, and so he went to jump school and qualified as a parachutist at the age of 40, and with this new qualification, he was assigned to a light infantry unit, and they were deployed to Palestine to train their army how to better fight the Arab forces. And while he was there, he gained even more fame when he defended a Jewish medical convoy from an Arab ambush. And he did this all while wearing a kilt. Another time, he and 12 of his men helped evacuate 700 people from a Jewish hospital that was under attack from Arab forces. After Palestine, Jack came back to England and eventually retired retired from the army and then begrudgingly took a desk job within the Ministry of Defense. And every day on his commute home on the train, he would take his briefcase and throw it out the window as they were moving. What he had figured out was if he threw it at the exact right moment, it would land in the backyard of his house, and he wouldn't need to carry his briefcase from the station to his house. But he didn't explain that to any of the other passengers on the train. They just figured there's some crazy guy who keeps throwing his briefcases out the window. In his retirement, he also became an extremely talented surfer. And at one point, he wanted to surf the Severn Bore, which is this huge wave in southwestern England that nobody else had surfed before. And locals that were familiar with this treacherous wave, they cautioned him and said, you really shouldn't do this. And he looked at them and he just said, I'll be all right. And then he proceeded to be the first person ever to successfully ride that wave. Jack would ultimately die in 1996. He was 89 years old. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please invite the like button to come out with you for a very casual get-together. And when you're about halfway through dinner, start aggressively hard selling your multi-level marketing scheme. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3 or 4 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. I also have a second YouTube channel called MrBallen Shorts where I post random short videos. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.